honestly speaking, you are working diligently in our church for all these years. You have been serving the Lord. So I want to know what motivates you to work like that for the kingdom of God.
Personally, what drives me is the teachings of Jesus, because I feel like I've read the New Testament more than, for sure, the Old Testament more times. But whenever I look at the four Gospels and kind of what Jesus instructs his disciples to do, and his ultimate mission was to make more disciples and to teach the young ones and to, encourage and rebuke and do all these things to raise them in the kingdom of God, basically. And one thing he left as far as the final instruction was, he said, make disciples, and teaching them to obey everything I have taught you. And so for us, if we are reading the words of Jesus, it's hard, it becomes difficult not to serve, because the call to Christianity is discipleship. And so when Jesus calls us to be his disciples, he doesn't leave it for us to just be his disciples, meaning by name, but we actually become disciples to disciple others. And so a friend of mine used to call it disciple cycles. And we're discipled, and then we disciple others, and they keep the faith going. The same thing that Paul was doing with Timothy. So he disciples him, and then he goes on to find churches, basically. But for me personally, it's almost like it is our calling in life. It is our purpose in life is that. Apart from that, everything else we do is just a means of living. You're working, you get an education, you get married, you have kids, you do all these things. But then the question that you ask sometimes is, then what? So, and that was from a sermon that I actually heard from you. And ultimately, it's we have to ask ourselves, what do we have to present to God? Because if we're taking back everything that he's given us, because all of it is a gift, but as far as our time, how do we use it? Was there any sacrifice in that to be able to take those gifts and to pass it on to someone else for their betterment, for their salvation? And so it's a calling, if anything. But now how we do it is of course up to God. He opens the doors, and in my time away from here when I was in college, it was with my frat brothers and the church that I was serving at the time there at a First Baptist church. And then when I came here, it's I found a place here with everyone in our church, and I've just been here ever since. And so how God does it, or the timing, the season, we don't know, but sometimes he puts you in certain places, and so you just have to make the best of it in order to be able to disciple others.
True. And Betty?
Knowing what I know about God, and having seen his hand in my life firsthand, being a witness to it, it's hard to see my life outside of serving him. Literally outside of serving him, what are you then serving? What, you're serving your boss at work, your family, your coworkers, your friends. The sad thing about a life like that is that life is gonna pass away. All those things are gonna pass away. He's not always gonna be my husband eternally. That my boss isn't gonna be there eternally. So as you said, what is it that I have to present to him? And so I don't see, it's hard to kind of imagine a life not in service to a king that has done so much for me, that I've witnessed personally. So I enjoy it. I mean, it's not easy.
It's not easy.
No, it's not easy.
But what is your calling? And what is it that you dream to do? What you think you have a burden to do? What is it?
I don't know. I mean, I can't say for sure this is it, but I know that I'm get very burdened by people in need, emotional need, they may be going through certain things in their life. I think I like counseling in a sense, not professional sit down counseling, but kind of a mentorship. I have people that can confide in me, and I think I enjoy that, pouring into especially young girls that may be emotionally going through things. So I mean, you can call that a calling. I don't know, but that's such a strong word. But like I think that's
your burden, your passion.
More of a burden, like
And
being there for someone, you know.
I think for me, I can relate to the young ones, like, because I think for me personally, the hardest part of life was during somewhere between adolescence to even through college. And so maybe that age group, because I find that to be a very volatile age. And so that's when a lot of people come to the Lord, but also a lot of people either completely stray away and they never come back, some of them, unfortunately. So I feel my calling is to help that young age group, because I know the challenges that come with the Christian walk, and then also just the temptations of the world constantly pulling you back and forth. And so I feel like that's where maybe my heart is, to figure out ways to help them, and kind of what we do with our young ones now, to be able to with the big brother, big sister mentorships and things like that, to just spend time with them. Sometimes really just listening to them is really what helps them, because they don't need another person who's just listening to say something back. They just want to be listened to, and you could tell them how you relate to it, how we had to pass through some of the same struggles, just because they're going through it now. They think you guys are old, you're way past, they think that we're completely absent from those things. But there was a time that we had to go through those things, and we saw the same things they see. We were exposed to the same stuff. And so to be able to just tell them, it's not easy, but, you just have to stay consistent, stay faithful, and stay in prayer. Also just ways to encourage them, anything that can, help them, of course, to get through that tough patch of life, and to be able to see them to become strong later. So
I know that you guys are working like big brother and big sister to many in our church, but this has to grow. I'm thinking like there are a lot of kids who are struggling, like you guys said it, and I know you guys can do a lot of help for them. So this should be in a broader way, like nationally, internationally. This time people can contact you by email, by any kind of communication. I would like to ask you about your married life. How long have you been married, and where did you guys meet?
The first time we met was actually it was 1995. That was the year when we came to the country, and I was about 8 years old. She was, I think, 6 at the time.
Love at first sight.
Really?
The complete opposite.
Okay.
He hated me.
We couldn't even communicate. I didn't speak English. I spoke Tigrinya, and I didn't think she knew Tigrinya.
I knew some, but I can't remember, honestly.
Our relationship really began so I went off to college for 4 years when I was 18, and then came back after I finished undergrad 4 years later. So we didn't really keep much in touch. I was, 10 hours away from Houston. But I moved here for graduate school. And then when I came back for graduate school, she was still attending her undergrad at the same school, University of Houston. And so I think she basically we started meeting up for lunch with her friends, because I didn't know anybody at the school. And so she would text me, certain places and places to eat in the school and the library. So she showed me around, and she just became a friend to me. And then I guess one day we started, studying together and things like that. And it was while we were studying, actually. So that was when we, the relationship began. And we talked, and I asked her. At first it seemed like no, almost, but she actually said yes. And we basically just said, let's, get to know each other better. And so we started serving, at our church together. I saw her heart for, the young people. She was pretty much, when I came back, she was pretty much the only one of our age group that was serving in the capacity that she was. And so she planned the conference that we had soon after I came back a few weeks later. And she was, just trying so hard with the young ones, trying to, just instill something in them to encourage them. And so I started serving alongside her. And you as well, Danny, I think you were there with us at the time. And so that really drew me to her. And so we started talking, and that's when we began. But there was years of that. So you can add some of the details.
So that was kind of the starting point. We had some kind of time apart, so it wasn't like a consistent 5 years. It was kind of like on and off. But I think God taught us kind of a lot during that time, and Even looking back now, like just to address things like knowing God's timing, when the right time is, and like making sure that He is involved in, all the decision making. Like just because you're feeling something doesn't necessarily mean it's, His right timing, because it might be the, biggest blessing ever, but if it's not in His timing, then it can be a curse almost, very distraction. Not a curse, distraction, that's a better word.
So from your experience, keeping it long was not a good thing. How long do you think is very feasible?
I think as far as the timing, maybe 6 months to a year is reasonable, because ultimately all you need is the planning process of making sure the family is able to attend the wedding hall and things like that. But as far as feasibility, I would say maximum maybe a year from the time someone's engaged to the time that they can
get married.
Get married.
You have had the 5 years time that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Was it difficult to stay holy and pure?
Whenever you start a relationship, the ultimate goal is marriage. But if you're starting a relationship with the plan in mind to get married 5, 6, 7, 10 years down the line, it makes it very difficult, because then it almost, I believe, as a Christian, it defeats the purpose of why you're getting in the relationship to begin with. And I don't think you can honestly keep someone, on hold, waiting, 10 years, telling them we're going to get married at this time, or after I graduate, or after I get this job. And so in my mindset, I always felt like I had to be finished with school first, at least. And part of the reason why it was on and off, and there was almost a 3-year gap in between the first time and then the second time we became involved, is for that reason, because it's very difficult, to think, well, we're in this relationship and the relationship is growing, but we won't be married for 5 years. And some people can, I'm sure, there are people who have, but part of the distraction that we were talking about is when you're in school, especially in graduate school, anything can cause you stress, but relationships can be one of them. And so the timing that God has, I think, is, if anything is causing you to become so overwhelmed and it's affecting your spiritual life, then you have to figure out, what can I do? What do I need to do to get back and focus on what God has for me at this moment? And so it wasn't easy, but I remember our conversation. It was, and I didn't, you never want to tell someone you care about, someone you love. I have these thoughts and I've prayed about them and I have these feelings, but I have to forget these things for some time. I don't know if it's going to be, this many years is basically the idea. And it's almost like she had to trust that it would be fine and that things will work out. If it's meant to be, God will put us back together. Because if you're taking it at face value, it almost seems like, especially at that age, it's a young guy. I was 22, 23. And you're saying this to a young lady. She has to think it's probably because something's wrong with me. She can personalize it, or she can say maybe something wrong with him. Maybe he's thinking about other people or wants to, go with someone else. Or maybe he changed his mind. So there's so many things that can go in through somebody's mind. But in many ways, I think she trusted that. I think her faith was in a place where she could trust God. If it's meant to be, that it will happen. So a big part of that, even during the 1 year or so that we were dating before we called it off for some years, a big part of it, in the sense of purity, we had to have someone with us even when we were dating. So dating, and not in the world sense, but we always had her sister, which she knew that we were together, and so she would always accompany us, if it was going to the coffee shop, movies, at their house. I would call her when she asked me, like, are you coming over? I would ask her, are your parents home, or is Sadon home? And so just to check. And for the first couple of times, she really didn't know what I was talking about. But I wanted her to know, if I'm going to be there, there has to be someone else. I don't trust myself. And, ultimately, I have, to say that I am a young man who wants to grow in the Lord, but I don't want to be in a compromised situation where you just, I can't trust myself to that extent. And so at some point she understood. And so whenever I would ask her, like, can I bring Tomas, because Tomas was living with me at the time when I was with my parents during grad school, she began to understand. She's like, yeah, sure, bring him. And she knew it was a form.
I really didn't get what was happening. Later, I was like, "Oh yeah, that's."
She's like, "Why are you bringing your brother?" And so, and then she liked Tomas, and so she gets along well with him. Cool. And so for her, it just seemed like, okay, sure, yeah, bring him. You know, it's more fun. And so that was basically how we had to almost, you know, go about it. But to think even to go like that for 5 years, you know, with the thought of marriage being so far, and sometimes just even relationship struggles and fights and disagreements, things like that can cause you to be so stressed during, you know, your schooling period. Sometimes it's better to just trust that, you know, if it's God's will, when the time comes that He's put in my mind that I'll be ready, can I trust that, you know, it'll work out the way He wants it?
Purity is like one of the, I think, biggest things that like our young adults, you know, youth kind of may struggle with, you know. And it's like, it's important to understand that, like, the Bible tells us to flee from sexual immorality. Like, every other sin is outside of the body. But when it comes to sexual things, like, we have to really, like, understand that we are a temple, and anything that happens inside of the body is messing literally with the temple of God. And like I think it's important to understand that at a young age. And of course, like, you know, we're not perfect. We weren't perfect. And so God had to really, like, teach us in a number of ways. Stepping into relationship, that should be probably, as believers especially, that should be a very direct conversation that needs to happen, like, day one. You know, like, how do we go about this? How do we stay pure? These are the steps that we're going to implement. This is you have to be very intentional. And that's, like, for anyone that's out there watching, that's really a point of advice. Like, you have to be very intentional, and the enemy will attack this area of your life if you're not, you know, prayerful, you know, in prayer about it and intentional. So you just have to be very, very wise.
And I think, just to add one more thing, I think purity, we have to understand it's a matter of the heart and the soul, really. It's not, you know, external things. It's not, I know some, you know, people can say, you know, but I failed in these things, and I failed in this manner, and this happened, and these things. It's not even so much that we're talking about. We're talking about just even just mental purity. Like, for a guy, you know, Jesus talks about whoever looks at a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her in his heart. And as a Christian, you feel convicted even just at the thought of lust and the things you see on TV and the things that you watch. That's the sort of purity that we're talking about, to be able to abstain from all such, you know, impurities.
That's true.
All such sexual sin, all the things that you expose yourself to, even, you know, to your heart and to your mind, apart from people, because there's many ways to become impure at a young age. And so for me, my struggles was with that. And so for me to think now there's a human person, you know, someone I care and love dearly, and to you know, allow Satan to manipulate that and to destroy that, it was you know, a decision that we had to make. And you know, even if it took years, you know, if it's God's will, to me it's always, you know, it'll happen. If not, you know, I just have to trust that I can look back and say that it wasn't His will. And so I think that's one thing that I would want the young people to understand, is that don't work towards purity that people can necessarily see. That's fine, that's good, but ultimately, like, you have to start with God and what God calls purity. What is it in your life that He's trying to remove, and you just have to, you know, let Him take it away slowly. The people around you, the things that you are exposed to, the things that you have that constantly keeps pulling your affections from the Lord. So
also, like, one thing that we've like told others too is, like, cars, like, driving, like, separately, because a car can be a dangerous place.
A big part of, like Betty said, the purity part, of course, you need accountability, because you need to know that your intentions of even the times that you meet have to be intentional. Is it just to hang out because you don't have anything else to do, or are you, you know, trying to make it fruitful to where you are going to get to know each other better, to learn more about the person. So oftentimes our meeting places were Starbucks, where Habeshas wouldn't be because we didn't want them
Far
to know.
away Starbucks.
So if it was just us
Woodlands.
two, we would, meet at a Starbucks. We'd, choose a location, and then we drive home from there. Or if we were gonna, go out and, hang out with other friends or people who knew that we were in a relationship.
Yeah.
And that was fine because we could see each other in a fun environment, where we're playing pool or games or tea houses and stuff like that. All of us enjoyed doing that.
Looking back,
Mm-hmm.
like when you get married, are you happy that you passed through that time with purity and holiness? Was it rewarding? Was it worth it?
It does. I think, one of the things is, as far as purity, you basically, if you contaminate yourself with, impurity, which is the opposite of purity, meaning you have, you go from one relationship to another, and you don't really have any boundaries in these relationships. Ultimately, it's like everything that you're taking from all these relationships, you could put into that marriage, and it can spoil the marriage itself, or put a lot of challenges in the marriage in different ways. But I think what helped us was just, everything we learned from that point, being able to look back and say, God spared us from a lot of things. And even me, just during the time when I first got saved, or even before that, the type of friends and things that I had, there were so many things that Satan could have used from my past to destroy me, or my faith at least, at a young age during college. And so going through that, ultimately I feel like has taught me a lot, even about myself, more than that, even what God has done to be able to pull me through all those things and to put me where I am now, to be able to look back and talk about those things. Because ultimately, if those decisions that we make, they do make a difference, a lasting difference, because ultimately you're taking all those things into a marriage with someone else who's also imperfect. And so it definitely can have a different dynamic as far as your relationship with that person who you're going to spend the rest of your life with. So it is important. And to anyone, like I said, as far as where God has me now, to be able to tell young ones, hey, just, be careful. Like, know the timing, know the place, know the person, and choose wisely as far as what you're doing with your time at a young age. So, because it can have lasting effects.